David was lucky to have been given the Friday afternoon off early. Even the traffic on the 610 cooperated, which surprised him. He was an executive in the oil and gas industry who worked downtown, but he commuted back and forth from the Woodlands each morning and afternoon. He and his wife, Tracy, were empty nesters now that their two children, Zach and Aubrey, were grown and out of the house. Aubrey had married and begun her own family while Zach was a sophomore at U of H. Pulling into the garage, everything appeared as it should be, but everything was about to change once he entered his home. Walking through the house to the master bedroom, he called for his wife to let her know that he was home. "Tracy," he raised his voice. "Sweetheart, I got off early and came right—" David noticed Tracy was in the adjoining bathroom, primping and preening in the mirror above the sink. She'd already attached one of her diamond earrings to her left earlobe and was adding the right as he walked toward the bathroom door. She was ravishing in her short black dress. Even at 44, she nearly had the same body that she'd had when they'd met in college and fell in love. "Oh," Tracy said. "Hi, honey. I was expecting you to be home so soon." Noticing her dress and appearance, he wondered if he'd forgotten an anniversary or scheduled dinner party. Maybe they were just going to enjoy an evening out to spice up their marriage. "You look beautiful," David said, honestly admiring his wife of 22 years. "Are we going out to dinner?" Tracy gave her husband a little peck on the lips as she moved past him and into the master bedroom. "Thank you, honey, you're so sweet," she said, accepting the compliment. "We're not going anywhere, I am." David stood, stunned. Are you going out with friends or co-workers to something?" he asked, trying to figure out why his wife should be getting dressed to the nines if it weren't to go somewhere as a couple. Turning her back to her husband briefly, she asked for assistance. "Honey, would you be a dear and zip me up?" she asked. Born of decades of conditioning and experience, he complied and zipped up the zipper on the back of the little black dress. He noticed that the hem barely ended mid-thigh. He couldn't fathom why she would be dressed so if not for a night out with her husband. Turning to face David, she once again kissed him, this time a little more intimately. She did, after all, love him. She'd been married to him since she was in her 20s. They'd raised two wonderful children together. He'd been a wonderful provider, and his income allowed her to live a lavish lifestyle of pools and spas and lunches with friends and concerts, but she was enamored of another man and was feeling stifled. Actually, bored with her current life and ready to add an additional aspect to it, was more like her feelings at the moment. "No, honey, I'm going out on a date," she began to explain. She knew this would be the moment that would wound David, but he'd grow to understand and get used to it. Jason had assured her that he'd be angry and sulk for weeks after their weekend plans, but once she returned next week, he'd see that she was the same Tracy that he'd partnered with so many years ago, and things would return to normal. She'd just have to soothe his bruised ego with some serious love and pampering. "I wasn't expecting you home before I left, so I've written out everything in a note," she said, nodding to a small note written on her stationery, lying on the bedspread. "It explains how Jason and I plan to go out to a fabulous dinner, followed by dancing, and then, well..." David felt like he was having an out-of-body experience. His shoulders and forearms tingled with a burning sensation. He could barely register what she was saying. "What do you mean? You're going on a date with your boss? Then you're going to go home with him? Over my dead body?" "David," she said condescendingly, like she was explaining to a child. "That's such a crude word to be using, but yes, he and I are going to spend the weekend together. He'll be here to pick me up, and I'll be home after I get off work Monday like normal. I've prepared several meals and put them in the refrigerator and left instructions on how to prepare them." She continued, "I know this is jarring, but it's just something I feel I have to do, and when I come home, we'll go back to normal like nothing ever happened. You'll see." "The hell you're going anywhere with another man? I will not have you humiliate me and throw away 22 years of marriage over a weekend love fest." "David, it's just intimacy and a little fine dining and dancing. It's nothing compared to those 22 years of marriage. I'll come back and you and I will grow old together. I think you owe me just a few days of fun after all these years." Tracy's phone made a pinging sound, and she opened her little purse, took it out, and glanced at the message. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Jason's outside and waiting." She attempted to give her husband a kiss, but he would none of it. They were in the middle of a life-changing argument, and he would not be dismissed like his wife was just leaving for work. "No!" he yelled as she turned and walked out into the hallway toward the living room. "I will not excuse you!" She moved from the living room into the foyer, opened the large, thick front door, and could see her employer's black BMW in the driveway. She opened the glass door and stepped out onto the porch, with David hot on her heels. "Don't be silly, David," she told him while walking toward Jason's car, facing away. "I'll call you every now and again to check on you. It's the least I could do. And David, if you go out drinking to get it out of your system, do give your keys to the bartender, won't you?" Tracy turned and faced her husband one last time. "I do love you, and I want you to know that I'll be back Monday night, and you can reclaim me then. You'll see. This will be just a minor bump in the road compared to my love for you." "Now, good night," Tracy said as she turned and moved toward the passenger side of Jason's car. "Tracy!" David yelled. "If you get in that car, our marriage is over!" It didn't seem to faze her a bit. She pulled on the handle and opened the door. Her rich boyfriend was in the driver's seat, smirking at the puny man that he was enjoying humiliating. "Tracy!" No exclamation mark, David tried again. "I will not allow you to leave with this jerk. Do you hear me?" She got into the seat and closed the door, leaning over to give a short kiss to her paramour for the weekend. Jason had told her it was only for the weekend, but his plans were to sink the hook now and keep coming back for more later. At work. After work. Maybe even in this humiliated husband's own marital bed. Wouldn't that be sweet? He thought. Tracy leaned back and put on her safety belt, ready to go have a night of fun followed by passionate love. "I will not let you leave with him," David yelled, loud enough to be heard through the windshield as he leaned his face over it. Seeing that Jason was putting the gear into reverse and backing away from the home, David made a split-second decision that he would not be made a fool by these two. He knew instinctively that his marriage was irrevocably broken, but he would not allow this humiliation to continue. Reaching toward the concealed carry holster in the small of his back, he unholstered a Springfield Armory XDS Mod Compact 45 that he always carried for protection. He aimed down and fired one bullet into the front passenger tire before swinging the handgun left and shooting out the rear passenger tire as well. "You are not going anywhere with this man!" David yelled. Tracy didn't know what to think. She was afraid David would shoot her and Jason next. She instinctively pulled toward the interior of the car, and her hands went up toward her chest. Jason, however, was furious. No one was going to disable his BMW, especially not this little man. His door flew open and the large man stepped out and slammed the door behind him, giving him a clearer path to kill this little pipsqueak. "You worthless man! I'm going to make you pay," Jason growled, lunging toward David in an effort to fight. He shouldn't have said that. David took a shooting stance and fired 2 bullets in Jason's center mass in self-defense. The bullets tore through Jason's ribs, lungs, and heart, felling him almost instantly. Since he'd had forward momentum, he fell forward, landing hard on the cement driveway. If he'd lived, he would have had a concussion from that fall, but he was dead before he hit the ground. Probably. The passenger door flew open and Tracy raced out of the car. "No!" she cried. "Jason!" Tracy raced to the man as if to render aid, but aid was not necessary, nor could she have done anything to save her love buddy now. "What did you do?" she yelled, alternately looking between David and Jason's body. Tears were streaming down both their faces, but for different reasons. "I told you that I wouldn't let you leave with him," David explained. "Then he tried to kill me, so I killed him." After the explanation of his actions, he turned his thoughts to a world without the love of his life. Tracy, how could you? How could you abandon our marriage? How could you humiliate me? You say that you love me, but a woman who loves her husband would never forsake him in such a humiliating way." Neighbors had heard the yelling first, followed by the 4 gunshots, and several had called 911. The police would be arriving in several minutes. David could lay down his firearm, go to jail, call his lawyer, and probably be released without charges because he acted in self-defense, although with dubious circumstances. But what good would it do? The woman he loved more than life itself had rejected and humiliated him. The house would be empty, and he would be alone, all alone. Yes, he had children and grandchildren, but they weren't reason enough to continue living. Tracy would be alive, yes, but she could probably never forgive him for shooting Jason, and he could never forgive her for getting into the car to go away with another man. Why keep living? "How could you? How could you, David? I was going to come back and everything would be okay." Tracy sobbed her rationalization. "How could you, Tracy? You've killed me. You've destroyed me. You were my everything." David spoke in the past tense. "You were my whole world. You've broken my heart. You're as necessary to me as air, and now you've messed that all up? For what? A few days of being with this terrible man? I cannot live without you, Tracy. I hope it was worth it for you." After saying his piece, David knew there were 3 more rounds in the magazine, but he only needed 1. David turned the handgun upwards, placed it against the soft palate of his throat, and pulled the trigger. The back of his skull shattered, and large portions of his brain fell back onto the grass behind him. "No!" Tracy stood and lunged toward her husband, trying to stop what she could sense he was doing, but it was too sudden. It was too late to be concerned about the man she claimed to love. His body crumpled onto the pavement in front of the car. She found herself lying between 2 dead men. She'd switched from being concerned with Jason to falling against the chest of her now-dead husband. "No, it wasn't supposed to be this way. This can't be real. This can't be happening. David, David, honey!" Tracy began a litany of terms of endearment for the man whose life she'd destroyed but thought she loved, punctuated with pleas for forgiveness that he'd never be able to give her. She cried without ceasing as the police appeared and lifted her up to get to David's body to check if he might be saved. The police called for 3 ambulances. 1 to carry Tracy to the hospital for examination, 1 for David's lifeless body, and 1 for Jason's body. David and Jason would be pronounced DOA, and their bodies were taken to the Houston morgue. Tracy was inconsolable. She was the cause of 2 men dying, and one was the man she'd lived with and loved for decades, the man she'd grow old with. He was supposed to die in his bed of old age, and she'd either join him shortly thereafter, or he'd be buried beside her, together for all eternity. Now, faced with her betrayal and a life without her, he'd opted to choose the time and manner of his death now, as she watched. Tracy was lucid enough at the hospital to tell the staff the names of her children, and she'd unlocked her phone so they might call them. She'd been in no condition to do much of anything. She was crying and gesturing and crying some more before a nurse brought her several pills in a small paper cup with a cup of water to wash them down. She fell into a deep sleep and was still asleep when Zach and Lori appeared by her side. They did not know what had happened. They only knew that their father had committed suicide and that their mother had been highly agitated because she'd witnessed it and thus had to be sedated. As a precaution, the nurses strapped her in her bed, and there was talk of putting her on a suicide watch as well. Zach and Lori sat on the uncomfortable furniture in her room, awaiting her first waking moments. They decided together not to press for details, but rather just support their mother. Tracy had woken up, looked at her children who were now standing around her, and all she could do was cry. She'd messed up her life, her husband's life, and also her children's life. She knew they'd find out what she'd done eventually and why their father did what he did, and she rightfully feared that they'd resent her until her dying day for her actions. She had to be sedated several more times after that, But after several days, she rode with Aubrey to her home. She and her husband, with their children, would allow Tracy to live in their guest bedroom until a decision could be made about the family home. At first, it was just a crime scene, but later, even after the blood had been hosed away to the gutters and then the sewer, Tracy could not bear to return to their home. After several weeks, the decision for her children to return to the house and pack up what could be packed up. David's clothes and things would be given to Goodwill, and several mementos and his things were packed away for a time to better view them, once the scars had healed somewhat. Then the house was sold. Tracy received money from the sale of the house, as well as David's 401k and their savings. His life insurance denied her claim because David had taken his own life, voiding the policy. Her children rented a small 600-square-foot one-bedroom apartment near Aubrey and moved her into it. Anything that wouldn't fit comfortably was placed in storage. Both Zach and Aubrey learned of the circumstances of their father's suicide and their mother being the cause. And although they didn't turn their backs on her, the relationships were forever highly damaged. Spending time with their mother became more of a burden to be endured, rather than a happy time with one's parent. Tracy herself was also forever broken. She'd found a job and worked during the day, but her co-workers learned of her life story and never really accepted her into their circle of friends. Tracy began attending church and joined a life group. After attending several, she felt it necessary to share with the group her life story and the tragic events. She would need to be completely honest with them if she were ever going to be accepted and helped overcome her feelings of grief and shame. She would frequently just go home after work and sit on her couch, with her cat in her lap and having the TV on, but not really watching. She also frequently cried herself to sleep, remembering David's last words to her, and she'd selfishly and stupidly inflicted pain on the man she loved. She felt that she didn't deserve love and never dated again. She'd wake up with nightmares of that afternoon, reliving the events, but never being able to alter them in her mind. Tracy lived until she was 62. She died, malnourished, frail, and generally in poor health of a cardiac arrest in her sleep, in her apartment. After failing to reach their mother by phone, Zach let himself into the apartment to find his mother had passed away. She had died of a broken heart, in more ways than one. After some debate, Zach and Aubrey agreed that their mother had mourned and grieved enough, and although they couldn't bring themselves to say that she deserved it, they nonetheless had her buried to the side of their father. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Matt knew he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and now the owner of the facilities firm he worked for wanted to see him immediately. He stood and proceeded towards Dan Connor's office. His mind was racing. There was no way Dan could have found out. As the accountant and general manager, only Matt ever looked at the details of the company's transactions, and at month's end all the accounts were balanced. Matt was sweating and feeling sick as he reluctantly knocked at the door. He reminded himself there was no way Dan ever checked the detailed accounts unless there was an obvious discrepancy in the balance sheets. He was always more concerned about his designer suits, fast cars, and chasing women. Dan looked serious and nodded at the seat as Matt entered. Matt's illusion of safety was shattered immediately. So I guess the question I need to ask is just how long have you been stealing from me? Matt's head began spinning. What? I have no idea what you are talking about. His denials continued until Dan produced the transaction logs proving a significant amount of money had spent some time in one of Matt's personal accounts before being paid back to the company. He knew the facade was over. He was caught red-handed. I'm really sorry, Dan. I just needed a short-term loan until the bridging company came through. Otherwise, we would have lost the new house Susan had set her heart on. I never stole it. I paid it back as soon as I could and before month end. I don't what they will class it as, Matt. Theft, I guess, or fraud, but you could be looking at jail. Even without that, you're looking at losing your job. I can't possibly trust you after this, Dan replied. Please give me a chance. It was a moment of madness. I've worked for the company for almost 20 years and have never thought of doing anything like this before and wouldn't do it again, Matt answered. Dan stood and looked out the window, seemingly in deep contemplation. You and Susan have been my friends for a long time. I guess that makes this all the more disappointing. Did Susan know you did this? Matt was surprised by the question. He thought back. It was actually Susan's idea. She was so desperate not to lose the house that she suggested it, convincing Matt no one could ever find out. Matt thought involving Susan might mean Dan didn't report it to the police, but he didn't want to implicate her. After a long pause, he said, "No, she didn't. It was my idea." Dan seemed surprised by Matt's response, but let it pass. "I need time to think this through, Matt. I'm not sure what to do for the best. Go home. Don't come back in the rest of the week. I'll make a decision on Friday." All the way home, Matt couldn't figure out how Dan had found out. No one ever looked at the transactions, and Dan certainly didn't do detail. His primary concern was about which option Dan would choose. None of them were very appealing, but the shame of a court case and time in prison left him in a blind panic. He knew Susan wouldn't be expecting him. He looked at their new home as he approached, deeply regretting buying the bloody thing in the first place. He suddenly recalled all those stories where a guy comes home early to find his wife having an affair. Wouldn't that just cap off a perfect day? Thankfully, Susan was her usually bright, sunny, and fully clothed self as he walked into the kitchen. He marveled again at her beauty. Just shy of her 40th birthday, her long, curly brown hair was pinned up, her fringe resting over a set of deep brown eyes. He preferred her figure now, which provided a few more curves and a lot more cleavage than when they were first married. Most of all, he loved her smile, a smile he was about to remove for the foreseeable future. Matt updated Susan with the account of his discussions with Dan and the damning evidence he had. Susan responded, "Oh my God, honey, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. It was my idea and all for this stupid house." Matt shrugged. "I told Dan you didn't know anything. Pointless getting us both into trouble." Susan, "Maybe if I spoke to him and pleaded?" Matt thought about it and suggested they just wait. He knew it was going to be the longest 3 days of his life. They could try the pleading if Dan chose the destruction option. He wondered what he would do in Dan's shoes. They were friends outside of work, often going out and attending parties together. Maybe that gives him a slim chance. Dan texted to say he would come to their home at 7 p.m. on Friday. Both Matt and Susan were sick with anticipation. Dan's Aston Martin pulled onto the drive exactly on time. The man with everything mused Matt: good looks, money, the ability to charm, and now the power to destroy him. He let Dan with a few strained greetings, and Susan offered him a beer as usual. Before he could say anything, Matt dove in. "I just want to say how very sorry I am, Dan. I let you and myself down badly. I understand I've put you in an impossible position, and I'll cope with whatever you decide." Dan gave a strange smile. "I do hope that is true, Matt." The following silence stretched onwards, becoming unbearable, before Dan finally continued. "You know I'm a bit jealous of you, Matt, your relationship with Susan. I miss that in my life." Matt was surprised. He always thought Dan had it all, including an endless line of hot girlfriends. Maybe heading towards 30, he was looking to settle down. "So it's with that in mind that I have a proposal. Neither of you will like it, but it's the only scenario where you can avoid a prison sentence, Matt. And remember, there is a risk to Susan as well, as it was a joint account and used to secure the house in both your names. I know you wouldn't have done this without her approval." Matt panicked at the thought of Susan being held accountable. He had no idea what the proposal could possibly involve. Dan let out a slow, long breath. "There's no easy way to say this, but my proposal involves me spending time with Susan." There was stunned silence. Dan went on. "No police, no court cases or prison. You stay employed and you two stay together, but I get to spend every Friday night with her." "You can't possibly be serious," whispered Matt. Dan, "I'm deadly serious. I've desired Susan for all these years, and this is an opportunity I just can't resist." Susan, "There must be another option. We can pay more back. Anything but." Anne, "This is my only offer. I'm told I'm not a bad-looking guy. Hopefully it isn't too much of a hardship for you. Maybe once things settle down, the arrangement won't be too uncomfortable for any of us." Susan, "We need time to consider it. We can't decide something like this quickly." Matt's head spun around. "You can't be thinking of agreeing to this, babe. Are you crazy?" Susan, "I don't see any alternatives, hun, and we've been trying to think of them all week." Matt seethed as he looked at Dan. "You miserable, low-life scum. It's a sick idea." Dan smiled in return. "That may be true, Matt, but I'm not a thief. You are, though." Dan turned to Susan. "If we are doing this, we need to start now. No time for you to think of a way to squirm out of it." After 15 minutes of shouting and accusations, Dan stood up. "It's decision time. I'm either walking out to my car or upstairs with Susan. He smiled and held out his hand towards Susan. After a hesitation, Susan took it. Matt was literally staggered and sat back harshly on the chair. Susan. There is no alternative, Matt. It will be okay. She then led Dan through the living room and up the stairs. Time seemed to stand still for Matt. The room was silent. Did that conversation really just happen? His mind jumped to what was happening upstairs. He could hear them moving around in a muffled conversation, and then the unmistakable sound of someone sitting on the bed. Long minutes passed in silence. Then he heard the first squeak of the bed, the unmistakable sound of two people beginning to be intimate. More movement and more noises continued. Then it got to a point where the squeaking was regular and combined with muffled groans. It got quicker and louder again. There seemed no end to it, and Matt thought he might be going insane. Finally, a loud yes and moan suggested Dan had achieved his goal. Matt felt shame and guilt. He dried his cheeks and eyes, expecting Dan and Susan to return downstairs. Again, there were muffled conversations and some movement. After a long silence, Matt stood thinking he should check if Susan was okay when he heard something again. The bed squeaking. He went to the foot of the stairs and could hear more, including snippets from Dan. That's it, baby, you're doing the riding this time. However, the most disconcerting noise was a fairly constant whimpering from Susan, which occasionally was interspaced with a yes. Matt had to get out of the house. He rushed out and walked aimlessly. Was Susan actually enjoying it, or was she putting on a show for Dan? He started wondering how vigorously she had argued against the idea. The fact Dan was 10 years his junior and handsome wasn't lost on him. By the time he reached the park, his thoughts had changed. Susan was doing this to keep him out of jail. He needed to get back to the house and as much as possible make sure she was okay. The Aston was still there, but the house was quiet as he entered. He went through to the kitchen and grabbed a beer. Turning, he saw Susan behind him in a short robe. They looked at each other, both embarrassed, before Matt managed. Are you okay? Susan gave a flicker of a smile. I am, thanks for checking, then continued. He's being okay, nothing rough or weird, just regular intimacy. I'm sorry if you could hear things. Matt shrugged. At least it's over. Susan looked awkward, replying, Actually, he wants to go again. He was thirsty, so I came for a beer and I wanted to check on you. Jesus, he must have been saving this up for you. Susan, why don't you go in the den? It might be easier for you. Quieter, maybe. See if you can think of a way out of this. Matt had been in the den for another hour and was no further forward with a solution when he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. He went out to the hall and caught Dan stifling a smile before he broke the awkward silence. Listen, I know this isn't easy for you, Matt. I promised to treat Susan with complete respect, and I really can't thank you enough for allowing me to spend time with her. I hope this gets easier for you, and obviously the work issues will remain between us. Raging inside, Matt replied, Don't thank me, you gave us no choice at all. Dan and Susan both looked awkward. It was clearly time for him to go. To Matt's amazement, as Dan said goodbye, Susan kissed him. It wasn't a smoldering kiss, but it was on the lips and lingered a second. Before Matt could say anything, Dan had left. He looked at Susan. What was that? Susan knew she had made a mistake. What? It was just a kiss goodbye. No, it wasn't. It was a sign of affection. I guess you had a nice time after all, and I shouldn't have been so worried, Matt replied. Susan fumed. I can't believe your boss was with me 3 times, due to your actions, I might add, and you're bothered about a goodbye kiss. Matt, it's supposed to be a transaction, an arrangement, just intimacy. Were you kissing him upstairs? Susan. Some, I guess, not a lot. Matt. Great, first of all, it's multiple times, then I hear you enjoying it, and now it's affection. Susan raged in response. It's not like that. Everything I am doing is to keep us out of jail. I'm going to have to show willingness and make sure he enjoys it. Plus, I can't moan if he's busy doing that to me. It's not exactly a voluntary reaction I can control. We're both going to have to get used to this. If I can put myself through this, then you need to find a way to cope with it. The last comment took all the energy out of Matt. Despite his doubts about her actions, Susan was making the sacrifice, not him. She could just walk away, and where would he be then? Jail, probably. Matt couldn't face the master bedroom knowing what had happened there. So they slept in the guest room, cuddling into each other. Susan was quickly asleep, no doubt exhausted. Matt didn't sleep a wink, his mind in constant turmoil, desperately trying to think of a way out of this hell. It felt like they barely talked the following week. The only conversation was how to get out of their predicament. Matt devised various plots, most of which were useless. Even when he did think of a viable solution, Dan seemed to preempt him. One of these included the idea of destroying all of the evidence, only to find out Dan had removed his access to the backups and stated he'd backed up all the financials to a new secure cloud system. Eventually, the following Friday loomed, confirmed when Dan texted to say he intended to take Susan out for a meal under the pretext that it might be an easier scenario to cope with. Matt wasn't sure if it was easier. On one hand, a date felt more like a relationship. On the other, it meant less time in bed with Susan. As it turned out, he got the worst of both options. Susan seemed very subdued about the date idea, but got ready. Matt thought she made a little too much effort and looked a little too good when Dan arrived to pick her up. Watching her in a little black dress and sling-back heels, being assisted into Dan's Aston Martin was heartbreaking. The evening that followed was worse. He sent multiple texts to Susan asking if she was okay. Each time he got a short response, saying she was fine just having a meal or just having drinks. They eventually returned at 10 p.m. Dan had his arm around Susan as they entered. They were both laughing and seemed in a good mood. Matt glared. Again, Susan seemed to be having all too good a time and was quite drunk. "We never agreed this would be dates," Matt muttered. Dan replied, "Relax, Matt, it was just dinner and drinks between friends. If this is going to be awkward, maybe we'd better go straight on up." Matt seethed. "What do you mean straight up?" Dan's smile returned. "The deal was every Friday, Matt, so I'll be sleeping with Susan tonight. I'm sure you can manage in the spare room." Drunk or not, Susan recognized the tension. Thinking Matt was going to go attack Dan, she guided him into the kitchen, whispering, "It will be okay, hun. I'll quickly sort him out and then pretend to go to sleep drunk. Remember, we don't have any choices." Matt retreated to the den with an overwhelming sense of impotence. He heard them go upstairs, Susan giggling, which he hoped was an act for Dan, but he couldn't help but wonder if the acting was for Dan or for him. Exhausted, Matt finally went to sleep in the spare room. Every time he woke, he heard the bed squeaking down the hall, so much for quickly sorting him out. When he went downstairs in the morning, Dan was already sitting at the table and Susan was making breakfast. He'd had enough. "Fuck off, Dan. It's not Friday and your time is up," Susan started with. "There's no need, Matt. We can be civil, it's just." Matt interrupted. "You've got 10 seconds to get the fuck out of my house." Dan looked like he was about to argue but stood to leave. As he went out the door, he reminded Matt, "Don't forget what you have riding on this, Matt." Matt turned to Susan. "Making him breakfast, really? You have got to be kidding. Why don't you just move him in? You're more his wife than mine now." He stormed out before she could even think about a reply. For the third Friday, Dan suggested they spend the night at a hotel to prevent any further confrontation with Matt. Susan left at 6 p.m. dressed casually, which again she thought would be easier on Matt. The plan was to change to the hotel room and Dan would meet her in the restaurant. She was a little taken aback by the opulence of the hotel. Her casual clothing didn't fit in. She collected a key for the pre-booked room, only to find upon entering it was a suite. There were flowers on the side table and 2 gift-wrapped boxes on the bed. She opened the larger box to reveal a very expensive and glamorous silver satin full-length dress with a halter neck and thigh split. The second box contained a red satin basque, matching thong, and luxurious black seamed stockings. She hesitated but thought there was no harm in trying them on. Amazingly, they all fitted perfectly and she had to admit to feeling really good in them. She made a decision to keep them on and went down to the restaurant. Dan met her, his mouth agape at how stunning Susan looked. The following dinner and wine were exquisite, the atmosphere highly charged, knowing what was to follow. Susan was now more relaxed in Dan's company and had decided to go with the whole scenario rather than fighting against it. The next morning, after another round of intimacy, Susan dressed in her casual clothes. She explained to Dan that she couldn't risk taking the dress or lingerie home. Dan agreed to keep them at his house for Susan's future use. Susan sighed, remembering this was going to be a long-term arrangement. Her emotions were in turmoil, not sure how she felt about things anymore. There was certainly plenty of guilt, but she couldn't deny a feeling of excitement and fulfillment. Matt lay awake most of Friday night. By Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Susan hadn't returned. Yet again, this seemed to be beyond the agreement. He doubted if Dan would have resisted taking Susan again this morning, and he wasn't convinced she would even try to avoid it. As much as he tried to resist it, he was losing trust in Susan, and if that happened, it could spell the end of his marriage. He had never felt so distant from Susan or so alone. Susan. That kiss was such a bad move. It had upset Matt more than anything else, and then the breakfast for Dan. What on earth was I thinking of? In fact, she was starting to think the whole arrangement was a terrible idea. From her point of view, her time with Dan was easier than she thought. He was respectful, handsome, and exciting. The money and cars certainly helped, but she always yearned for the finer things. Her dilemma was that being intimate with him was incredibly passionate. It was a constant struggle not to scream and shout and ask for more. She hoped Matt would get used to things and come around, but it had been 3 weeks, and he remained morose. They also hadn't made love, which she desperately wanted to put right. She loved him so much and regretted the position they were now in. She'd tried telling Matt that she was coping and he shouldn't feel guilty. Then she said that Dan treated her well. It's just intimacy, not making love, and he wasn't looking to break them up, but it had no effect. Matt seemed defeated and lost. His steady, reassuring presence in her life was becoming a distant memory. When he arrived at work on Monday, Dan informed Matt he needed to cover an out-of-town training event on Wednesday and Thursday of that week. Matt was immediately suspicious, but given his precarious work position, had no alternative but to cover it. "Okay, can cover it. But this doesn't impact our personal arrangement. You can't visit when I'm away," Dan replied. "No, of course not." When he informed Susan that night, she didn't seem that surprised or concerned. Courses weren't common, but they happened once or twice a year. It just felt too convenient to Matt. He went to the den. His intention of planning a way out predicament was losing a battle against a blinding headache. As he came back up the stairs to find some painkillers, he could hear Susan on the phone, catching her side of the conversation. He wondered who she was talking to and listened to her part of the conversation. "What are you doing? Sending Matt on a trip?" "No, it's a bad idea. This is not working out, and you coming over will make things worse." "No, he hasn't thought of anything else yet. It seems like he has given up and accepted things." "It's not how I thought this would go." He's devastated. "You know I like our time together." "I know it was my idea, but I didn't expect him to be this distraught. It was supposed to be a safe alternative to us having an affair with no risk of being found out. I didn't intend all of this. I didn't help things with the kissing and breakfast, and you have been an arrogant prick at times, smirking and rubbing his face in it. Okay, can come over during the trip, but then I think we will need to scale it back and be more discreet, or maybe even end it. If you suggest an end to the arrangement because you can see how it's impacting Matt, then you can be the good guy and we can go back to normal. Maybe, if you are discreet, we could still meet occasionally. We'll speak later. But I really do need to fix things with Matt. I still love him." Matt staggered back down the stairs, feeling like he had been punched in the guts. Did he really just hear all of that? He couldn't quite comprehend all of the implications. No wonder Dan seemed to preempt all his plans. Susan was telling him in advance, and it was all her idea in the first place. She had suggested it and convinced Matt to borrow the money against his better judgment. That would also explain how Dan found the discrepancy in the first place. It was so buried that he didn't think even an audit could find it. Far from being married to a saint preventing him from going to prison, he was in fact married to a cheating, conniving bitch. His mind raced to thoughts of revenge and violence. Everything crowded in on him. He knew he had to calm down and think rationally. He needed a plan, preferably one where they started to feel some of his own unease. Matt avoided Susan for the rest of the night and the following morning. When he saw Susan on Tuesday night, he never mentioned the overheard call, but he said he'd heard Dan at work boasting about getting some more. Matt continued, saying he could only pray he didn't mention Susan by name. Matt left early for the trip on Wednesday, with Susan saying she loved him. He managed a brief smile and pretended to be distracted by checking the schedule on his phone as he set off. Dan arrived at Susan's later Wednesday morning. She immediately asked about the boasting, but Dan denied all knowledge of it, accusing Matt of stirring things up. Susan wasn't sure who to believe. She couldn't see any reason for Matt to make that up. Maybe Dan was less discreet than she thought, which would be problematic. Between the bouts of intimacy, they discussed the situation and what they could do about it. Susan was missing the emotional connection she had with Matt. What she had with Dan was purely intimacy. Before leaving on Thursday afternoon, Dan persuaded Susan to continue their affair, but Susan made it clear this would be their last time together until they had things back on track with Matt. As Dan left the house, he stopped short. He couldn't quite believe what he was looking at. Perfectly puncturing the gleaming hood of his Aston Martin was a large kitchen knife standing upright. He looked around, but no one was there. All 4 tires were slashed as well. He went back in and told Susan. They both began panicking. Could Matt have come home early? What did he know? It had to be him. Unless it was kids or someone jealous of the flashy car, it wouldn't be the first time it had been vandalized. Susan phoned Matt. Asking how the course was, he casually confirmed it was exceeding dull, that he didn't need to be there and was just starting to make his way home. He sounded calm and never asked about Dan. Susan said she couldn't wait to see him and finished the call. She recited the conversation to Dan, saying he didn't sound upset, maybe it was just some kids after all. Either way, they needed to get it towed before Matt got home, which caused some frantic calls and costly fees. Things seemed normal when Matt returned on Thursday night. Susan tiptoed around him, playing the dutiful wife. It was a surprise when Dan messaged confirming he wanted to come over Friday, but just to discuss their situation. Susan smiled, thinking Dan was going to call a halt to things. Maybe the car had freaked him out enough for him to stop things. On Friday morning, Matt went to work as normal. At 11 a.m., he phoned Susan from work in a panicky, distressed voice, saying that there was something she needed to see. Matt explained he had just received a video clip via their personal email and she needed to see it. Susan opened their email on her phone, found the message, and opened the video clip. The quality was poor and only lasted 20 seconds, but it was unmistakably Susan and Dan being intimate. The sender was an anonymous address. Matt: Jesus, is that our bedroom? It's hard to tell, but it looks sunny, like midday, so I'm not sure when that would be from. Susan knew exactly where it was from. She could vividly recall Dan being with her just like that on Wednesday. But she replied, I'm not sure, maybe it's edited and they messed with the light. Matt: that is you, isn't it? You seem to be enjoying it. Susan let the comment pass. She had more important things to worry about and could explain her enthusiasm to Matt later as part of an act for Dan. Matt went on. What's Dan playing at? Is that what he wanted to discuss tonight? Is this just another form of torture? You didn't fall out or threaten him with him, did you? Susan immediately denied it, but then remembered telling Dan of her intention of stopping things. Maybe he reacted badly and intended to use the video to keep things going. He must have set up a video at some point. He had plenty of opportunity to do so over the 2 days. Matt said Dan wasn't at work, so he couldn't ask him. Susan desperately wanted to contact him and still hoped to cover their activities in the previous few days. Just then, Susan's phone pinged with an urgent call me now message. It was her sister Diane. She told Matt she had better answer it, hoping it would give her some much-needed thinking time. She ended the call with Matt and called Diane, only to be greeted by a barrage of questions and expletives. When Diane finally paused for breath, Susan managed to establish that her sister had received the same video clip. Her phone kept bleeping with attempted calls from most of her close friends and even her mum. My God, had they all received the clip? This was an absolute disaster. There was no way Matt would do this to me. It had to be Dan. Susan was irate. She tried calling Dan repeatedly but couldn't get a reply. The reason she couldn't contact Dan was that Matt had picked his phone up at work whilst he was in a conference meeting. He threw the battery in the bin and kept the handset and SIM card. He also left an envelope on Dan's desk before making the call about the video to Susan and then quietly leaving work. When he got home, Matt thoroughly enjoyed watching his wife's angst and confusion at what was happening. She was distraught that her mum would have seen the clip and all her family and friends would think she was having an affair. Matt played along, making various useless suggestions on how to limit the damage, throwing in his own confusion about when the clip could have possibly been taken. Susan still wasn't admitting to Dan's midweek visit. Susan. How had this gone so horribly wrong? She had never thought about having an affair until she had gotten drunk at a party and flirted a little too much with Dan. He was handsome, engaging, and obviously interested. After that night, he had been on her mind a lot. Over weeks, she managed to convince herself that she deserved some excitement but wouldn't dare risk her marriage to Matt. She had seen a friend's marriage end after a similar affair was discovered, but she had always been smart and thought her plan was a clever way to avoid all the pitfalls of an affair being discovered. I mean, how could Matt discover something he already knew about? Working out the details became a challenge and all part of the excitement. From her perspective, it was a great arrangement, but she had never fully considered the impact on Matt. Now she was in a world of pain. Everyone liked Matt and would know she had cheated on him. She was dreading trying to explain her way out of things. No one would ever believe Matt knew about her having sex with Dan. None of that mattered, though, as long as she could convince Matt this wasn't her fault. Dan's screeching tires announced his arrival at Matt and Susan's home. He was greeted by Susan trying to attack him. Matt did nothing to stop her, noting an impressive scratch mark across his cheek. Eventually, Dan managed to pin Susan against a wall long enough to speak. Dan had heard about the video but insisted he hadn't taken or sent it. Susan fumed. "But if it wasn't you, then who?" Matt started laughing. "I guess that would be me then." Susan and Dan looked dumbstruck. It was Dan who caught on first. "So you worked out about us meeting this week?" Matt: "Alas, I did." Susan started to try and justify it as a continuation of the arrangement. Again, it was Dan who caught the full implications of the video. He knew they had discussed the whole situation and suspected Matt had it all taped. He tried for some damage limitation. "I'm really sorry, Matt, I just couldn't resist Susan. I never meant this to hurt you so much. I made a major error of judgment and just got carried away. I'll end the arrangement and overlook the financial irregularity." Matt: That's so good of you, but it's all a bit too late, I'm afraid. You'll find my resignation on your desk." Susan piped in with, "You can't, Matt. How will we pay for the house?" Matt: "Don't worry about that, honey. It's going up for sale tomorrow." Anne jumped in. "There's no need, Matt. We can put this behind us. I really need you at the firm. You know the business and the clients inside out." Matt smiled. "I guess that's true. It's probably why your main competitor has offered me a job. I suspect some, maybe even most of the clients will move with me. You owe more leave than the 4-week notice period, so I won't be back." Dan's fake smile faded, and Matt continued. "I suspect a good few of the workforce will be on their way as well. I told them I was leaving, and most don't seem to think you have what it takes to keep the company going." Dan rallied. "You need to think this through, Matt. You can still go to prison." Matt: "Oh, I don't think so. Would you want to implicate your lover? She received half of the benefits of the fraud. Anyway, you have committed blackmail, and thanks to your little tryst here, I have that admission on video. It's amazing what electronic devices you can buy these days. The recording is with my lawyer. In addition, you may find some of your files have been erroneously deleted, and I know you didn't back up anything remotely. It does pay to have colleagues who like working with you, but I guess you wouldn't know that." Dan sneered. "That recording will never stand up in court," Matt replied. "Funnily enough, my lawyer said the same thing, but I can use it in other ways, and by the time it's sorted, you will already be out of business. On the bright side, my new firm may be willing to buy you out. I hear their new chief operating officer is a decent guy." Susan realized that Dan, his business, and his money were in serious jeopardy. She decided to blame it all on Dan. Dan listened in disbelief as Susan launched into an impressive act of the wronged woman. "I love you, Matt. This was all Dan's idea. He made me do it. I admit I got confused and a bit carried away, but I was just going along with it to save you from prison. I didn't really have a choice, and because of that, my life is in ruins. Please, Matt, I love you." Dan muttered, "You two-faced lying bitch." Matt smiled at the rather apt description. "Ah, my dear loving wife, in addition to the video, you're overlooking the fact that I overheard you on the phone admitting this was all your idea, a rather elaborate and cruel cover for an affair. You will find divorce papers in the envelope in the kitchen drawer. You're leaving tonight and will agree to the terms of the divorce, or more of those video clips might find their way to family and friends. I'm sure your mum will love to hear that not only are you a cheating slut, but the extent to which you plotted and blackmailed." Susan burst into tears and slumped to the floor. Matt looked at Dan. "Do you want to take her with you?" Dan: "Not a chance. More trouble than she is worth." Matt: "Well, on that we are agreed." Dan: "This isn't over, Matt." Matt: "That's true." At that, Matt swung for Dan. He wasn't sure who was more surprised as his fist crunched squarely into Dan's jaw, felling him on the spot. "It's over now." Dan. Matt had listened to the recording repeatedly. Most was agony to hear, but he liked the part where Dan and Susan were worrying if he had found out and gone insane. The knife in the bonnet was wonderfully melodramatic, and doing it provided his first smile for weeks. Matt did take up the new job with Dan's rival, and customers and employees followed. Dan held on bitterly, but eventually had to put his firm into administration, and there were rumors of personal bankruptcy. Shortly afterward, he moved out of the area. Susan ended up living in a small flat with money from their house sale, but no other income from Matt. As a result, and with few qualifications or experience, she was working 2 temporary jobs as a domestic and waitress on 0-hours contracts. Her former friends shunned her, and she was barely talking to her mom and sister. Matt's increased salary and bonuses meant he could drop to a 3-day week and make time for the sports and outdoor interests that he had neglected during his marriage. He hadn't realized how much Susan had influenced his decisions, including buying a large house and filling it with stuff. He wasted no time in selling it. He remained in contact with Susan's mom and sister. Diane, in particular, kept apologizing for her sister's affair, suggesting she would never make the same mistake. Matt wondered exactly what she meant by that statement, thinking it might be fun to find out at some point, especially as Susan would be furious. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Anniversaries come and anniversaries go, but this one was worth celebrating. It was the 1-year anniversary of the day I discovered that my marriage was over. I know what you're thinking. Who celebrates something like that? Well, I'm not so much celebrating the pain as I am pausing to recognize that I lived through it and came out the other side stronger. It was 1 year ago today that I was sitting in my office thinking, I didn't sign up for this, did I? I remember the vows, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, till death do we part. Death was starting to look like a way out. It was my exit strategy. You see, that day I learned that my lovely and loving wife of 6 years, my best friend, the woman who was everything to me, was a cheating woman. I know what you're thinking. You think the signs were there. She was staying out late, taking showers as soon as she got home, always too tired for love, and getting snippy with me over every little thing. Nope. There was none of that. I was just a clueless bastard. So how did I find out? It was a Wednesday and nearing the lunch hour. I was on my way back to the office after making an unplanned office visit to a client, and I was thinking that I'd grab a fried fish sandwich at a little shop I know. They call it the Whale, and it's fresh fried with tartar sauce, lettuce, and tomato on a sub roll. It's like fish and chips on a bun. You know how it is when things are going well, everything is falling into place, the clients are happy, and you're enjoying thinking about a good lunch that's just minutes ahead of you. That was me. I was fat, dumb, and happy. That's when it happened. I was stopped at a light when I saw my lovely wife coming the other way make a right-hand turn into the parking lot of the local no-tell motel. I thought, what the hell? I made a right into the gas station parking lot, pulled into a spot, and watched as she got out of her car and walked straight to one of the rooms. She knocked, the door opened, and in she went like she'd done it 1,000 times. What the hell? You're probably thinking that I ran across the street and started beating on the door. Then I broke down the door and beat him with my bare hands. Now you're thinking that I slipped across the street and walked to the room where I found the curtains slightly parted. I looked between the curtains, and I saw everything I needed to know. No, not that either. I needed to know. But I didn't need for her to know I knew. I just found a place where I could sit quietly in my car and watch that door. An hour after she arrived, she left. 5 minutes behind her was a man wearing an expensive suit who got into his Lexus and drove away. Typical. I always thought a Lexus was an overpriced affectation for someone who was showing off. I was useless that afternoon. I didn't even try to work. I just sat in my office and researched divorce on the web. It was as bad as I'd heard. Whether I went with no fault or adultery, the outcome was the same. Damn her. They were going to pay. Then I realized that I didn't even know his name. How was I going to make him pay when I didn't know who he was? That night the fates intervened. I'd hardly said 2 words to her all night, and she was asking me what was wrong. What the hell did she think was wrong? Was she feeling guilty? Was she afraid I knew something, or was her thinking so disconnected and her behavior so compartmentalized that she didn't put my attitude and her actions together? I was watching the late-night news, and there was a local story about a bank being robbed at the lunch hour. They had footage of the robbers, and the woman looked passably like my wife. She was wearing a COVID mask, but the hair and eyes, along with her height and build, made her a good twin for the woman I'd married. Of course, I knew it wasn't her because she was in that motel room laying it down for that jerk with the Lexus. But I could play dumb with the best of them. Hell, maybe I'm not even playing. The next morning, I called the police department and asked about the robbery. I was told they were working several leads, which is cop speak for we got nothing. Component placement, so I ever so innocently told them that the woman looked a lot like the woman who lives down the street from me, and I gave them her name. I also told them that she recently bought a new car, which was a half-truth because I bought it, and I happened to know that she wasn't at home when the robbery occurred. That last bit was sure as hell true. I figured they'd knock on the front door, have an embarrassing talk with the cheating woman, and at the least I'd get a good laugh out of it that would carry me through the next few weeks as I filed divorce papers. Oh no, it went much better than that. When the cops saw that she really did resemble the robber to a remarkable degree and she couldn't explain where she was at the time of the robbery, they took her to the station for what they euphemistically referred to as an interview, where she was forced to admit to where she'd been and who she'd been with. It wasn't hard for anyone who heard her to guess what she'd been doing. By the way, that's how I eventually got the jerk's name. They kept her while they checked out her alibi. That's a sanitized way of saying they put her in a cell and went to the jerk's house looking for him. When they didn't find him, his wife gave them his work address. The interest in her husband did not escape the attention of his wife. When he tried to deny the affair, they went to the motel and pulled the records. His electronic signature did not help his credibility with the police, but it did provide them both with an alibi. It turns out that lying to the police really is a crime, and so they returned to his home that evening to charge him with a minor offense. I secretly suspect they waited until he was home so they could arrest him in front of his wife. It didn't result in any great fine or jail time for Jerk, but it did get him divorced. The story was just too juicy to contain, and the matter of the cheating bandit became a running joke at the station that was soon told to the spouses. The spouses told their friends, and their friends told their friends, and pretty soon my wife and the jerk were the laughingstock of the town. Even the judge who heard my divorce plea laughed when he realized who she was. Eventually, the divorce was final. She did all the expected things and said all the usual cliches, but trust was broken, and it wasn't going to mend in this lifetime. She heard the whispers and the stifled laughs behind her back wherever she went, and she soon left town not far behind the jerk. I have no idea where she is or whether they are together, and I can no longer care. I am moving forward. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if it was worth the effort. I knew she cheated on me, and I was content to divorce her for it, but I wanted to hold her up to public ridicule as the cheater who had to confess her affair to avoid being arrested for armed robbery. I imagined her having to admit, "Sure, I'm a liar and a cheat, but I'm not a thief." There was less satisfaction in it than I had hoped, but I have to admit that I would do it again if faced with the same situation. Eventually, 2 police officers paid me a visit. You can't do anything with anonymity anymore, so they knew full well it was me who called them and tipped them off to my wife. Officially, they were not amused. Unofficially, I offered to buy them each a beer, and we decided to call it even. It seems one of them was divorced and the other was getting divorced, and they admired my creativity. "Just don't do it again," was all they told me. I wasn't sure whether they meant reporting my wife as a bank robber or marrying her in the first place, but either way, I agreed to both. So here I am a year later. I've rid myself of the deception that plagued me, and I'm rebuilding my life. I had a few minor friends who were really friends of my wife and who knew about her betrayal, so I had no difficulty cutting them from my life. Then I doubled down on the good friends who stood by me. I didn't date until the divorce was final. I took that time to work through my emotions. Then about a month ago, I met a delightful woman my age. She too is divorced from a cheat. We have that much in common. She too is rebuilding her life, and she too has made it her life's work to find the very best bourbon made on earth. We consider it our sacred mission, and we take our mission very seriously. Maybe we'll make it, and maybe we won't. We're taking it very slow. For now, I'm enjoying every minute I get to spend with her, and tonight she's helping me celebrate my divorce. Wish me luck. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.